We take 3 more minutes before we begin, so we're sure that everybody's here.
So just before beginning the conference, I will just explain you some rules to have a great experience. So if you want, you can sit or stay like this. You can use on the top of your screen the screen zoom tool. It permits you to see correctly the screens just there, and just please don't come on the blue carpet because it's the conference area. It's just for speakers. And if you have any question, you can use the raise hand just next to your chat bar. And yeah, just cut your mic too. And thank you. Have a great experience. And I will say it in French. Rebonjour tout le monde pour cette deuxième conférence d'Art VR 2020. Juste quelques petites règles pour avoir une bonne expérience des conférences. Merci déjà de ne pas venir sur la moquette bleue, qui est la zone de conférence qui est réservée aux speakers. Si jamais vous avez du mal à voir les écrans, vous pouvez utiliser l'outil Screen Zoom qui est en haut de votre écran au milieu. Et ça vous permet en fait de zoomer sur chaque écran qui sont derrière moi. Si on va vous demander de couper vos micros évidemment, et si jamais vous avez une question, n'hésitez pas à utiliser l'outil Raise Hand qui est juste à droite de votre barre de chat. Voilà, je pense avoir tout dit et je vous souhaite une très bonne expérience à tout le monde.
So more and more people are coming in. That's really great. Welcome. We take a few more minutes for everybody to arrive and sort of figure out how their body works. And then we'll start off this afternoon session, or at least in Europe this afternoon, on designing mixed reality or XR experiences with a special focus on the topic of embodiment. I have some tables introduced in the room. If you feel you want to sit down, you can. It's also nice to stand around, which is perfectly fine. But if you're all standing in front, people might get tempted to get up as well. And before you know, we're all standing here. So if you can find a chair, sit down, so you're not blocking the view of everybody else, then you're most welcome to do so. Also, as just was announced, you will have some zoom options to the top of your screen. If you want to see the screens or the slides a bit better, you can click on that and it will zoom in, so it's easier to read. This must be the quietest conference I've ever done. Clearly, we are figuring out new protocols to be together in these kind of worlds. Now, I'd like to do another check, see how many people are actually alive. So if you hear my voice and you're ready to begin together, why don't you give an applause or make some sort of movement? There's a lot of stuff happening. Hands are going up. Great. You all have changed into colorful two-dimensional confetti figures, which is interesting because I cannot see anymore your movements. But I guess that's due to the fact that we now have about 130 people in the room, which is great. So if you can find a chair, why don't you sit on it so you're not blocking the view for other people. And if you want to see the screens, you can click to the top controls. The zoom in will give you a better view of the slides if you want to follow the particular slides. And if everybody's ready, then why don't we begin this session? Afternoon session on art and XR experiences. My name is Joris WEIJDOM. I've been asked by Judith to moderate this session of 4 different talks, all about art, and I asked the artists to especially focus on their process of making We're not only going to present some interesting XR artworks. Two of them were actually selected at the Recto Verso art exhibition that was supposed to be presented physically, of course, at the Laval virtual conference in Laval. They will also showcase a bit their work and tell about how they made these things. I will kick it off with a lecture to sort of introduce the idea of embodiment and the notion of designing XR experiences. And somebody's typing really loudly, so if you could mute your microphone if you don't need it right now, that would be great. I will kick this session off with a presentation, and then we'll continue, and I will try to moderate if you have questions afterwards.
Ooh.
So let's see if my slides work. That would already be a small miracle. As I said, I'm not only a moderator, but I call myself a mixed reality designer and researcher. I basically do that because nobody else seems to know what that basically means. And that gives me, but also us, a lot of space to still discover what mixed reality and XR design can be. And I think it is also relevant because there's so much more we need to explore, including having online XR experiences like this. I work at the HKU School of Arts. I get an announcement now. I work as an educator, lecturer, and researcher at the HKU University, Arts Utrecht. And I'm currently also doing a PhD research on XR design and collaborative work. So what I like to admit to you is that, hey, Meili, maybe you could sort of move back a little bit. So when I was studying in the 90s, I already loved VR, and I was very interested in using VR as part of my artistic practice. But basically because I wanted to be elsewhere. I was still young and a little bit escapist. But now I'm a bit older, and I sort of like to be in my physical body. I like to be in nature and in virtual or physical spaces with you, which now is a bit tricky. So I more and more got interested in actually blending the physical and the virtual world. And that brings me basically to the idea of mixed reality. There's a lot of talk about mixed reality and extended reality, and what is the difference. I sort of like to hold on to the idea of mixed reality as being a scale between the real and the virtual. And the nice thing about the scale is that whatever kind of experience you actually design can be on that scale. So it's not a particular device that does a particular thing. It's more about thinking on an experiential level where you are on this scale between the real and the virtual. And also over time, when you make an experience, these things can actually change. So things might become more embedded in the real world, or they might change slowly more into a virtual experience. So I work at the School of Theater, and I already noticed that a lot of questions that are now relevant within the XR community and that are being asked in terms of making meaningful XR experiences are very akin to the questions that theater makers are already asking for the last 2,000 years. And this has to do with, if you could please mute your microphone, that would really help. Theater makers are already questioning this idea of being in a real theater space while also having the experience of something theatrical at the same time. So the wonderful thing about theater is that it has already 2,000 years of thinking about blending, mixing the real and the virtual. So this is why I want to sort of advocate a little bit that it's good to not only look at theater, but also work with theater makers when you're busy with creating interesting and meaningful XR experiences. Recently, in June 2019, I was asked to do a VR installation within the Prague Quadrennial, which is an architecture and theater design once every 4-year world conference. And we had the physical space of an ice skating hall that was completely transformed into a multimedial environment. And in there, we created 4 VR experiences. whereby we really use the architecture of the building and reproduce that also within the virtual experience. But as you can see, the person who is standing with the VR helmet there is there standing in sand with her bare feet. And we did that on purpose because we knew that if we would have these people float around in the virtual space, because basically in the experience you move up through the virtual roof and then break into new dimensions, people would get dizzy and uncomfortable. So we created a space where you are with your bare feet in sand, because it literally anchors the body in the experience itself. We noticed that a lot of people were mentioning that they were not getting sick because the sand is an unstable surface, so the body was constantly aware of trying to keep its balance, and for that
Excuse
reason,
us, we have a problem. We have no slide.
no.
Yeah, Joris, the presentation has gone down. There's a crank wheel on the screen. How did you like that? Do you see that?
Slide. Oh, I see. Sharing their screen. I am sharing my screen. All right. Let's see. I'll stop again and start sharing again. So it went well for exactly 5 minutes. That's a good start. Okay, Julien, if you can take over and basically throw on your crank wheel version of my Google Slides,
Yeah,
that would really help. Why we made a backup. Yep. We throw it full screen. Julien?
Yeah, I'm just putting it.
And then use the full screen window to share.
Okay, or do you need a... Okay, like this, or you prefer...
No, can you do the presenter view? So can you go full screen with this, please? Yep, there you go.
And you had the...
I had the slide with mixing spaces, site-specific, site-responsive there. Yeah, it's the next one.
Yeah, this one. Okay, perfect.
Okay, so sorry about that. I don't know if you have encountered this a lot already today, but this is the challenge we're in right now altogether. So thank you for your patience. As I was mentioning, we were creating a physical space that was duplicated or represented in the virtual space as well, and then have an experiencer, which we will call this person in that experience, to connect to their body by having their feet in sand. So I think it's very important, and I can talk already an hour about this project, which I won't do, but I think next slide, please. What is important to mention is that the core question or the core point I want to make is that the physical body is actually central to any kind of VR, AR, XR, MR, whatever R experience. And this is often forgotten while people talk about being in cyberspace together. So it is important to think about how this physical body can be part of the design. And the nice thing is, like I was mentioning, theater has been thinking about this already for quite a while. So next slide, please. I don't know if you know the work by Crew. It's a Brussels-based theater group, and they have been working already for the last 20 years with VR, fully immersive experiences. But they do that and present that within the context of theater. So half of the audience is basically immersed, they call them immersants, immersed in the experience, and their bodies are physically moved around in the theater space in synchronicity with the things that they see within the VR. But also, as you can see, half of the audience is basically looking at this performance, and later they swap roles. So not only is it about VR being a physical experience, when you talk about theater, it's also interesting to look at people going through these experiences. So there are many layers and perspectives to potential XR experiences that are very essential. For example, the people who are looking at others going through the VR experience was also a great way for them to start reflecting on what the experience would be for them or what it would mean to them, and the other way around. Next slide, please. So we see actually more and more, which I really, really like, on all sorts of wonderful, like Tribeca, VR Ham, Recto Verso. More and more you see these almost like XR or mixed reality installations, whereby the physical space is in direct connection to the actual art or virtual experience. And I like, for example, the work by Macropol, who have really made these elaborate spaces where you can basically walk around and have all sorts of experiences where everything you see in VR is partly connected to actual physical objects. Now, I would have loved to show you some videos and stuff, but unfortunately, due to technical reasons, we can't. But as you can see, they have a website, so you can see the trailers. So next slide, please. So what does this mean then for the making? Well, I think it is important to realize that when you're making a XR experience, you should also incorporate then your own body in the design process. So this is important because many people tend to think, I first have some technical people doing all the virtual stuff, and then we put it together and we'll have a VR installation, and then we have to think maybe about the physical aspect of presenting it to the audience. But we noticed that when we were doing the Prague project, I was already sketching with my partners, Paul Segis, to actually improvise the experience, partly by doing it in a very early stage of our ideation. So what you see here is a screenshot of my colleague Paul, who's a stage designer, a digital scenographer. He's trying out already our assumptions of being in that physical pool, leaning on the edge, see how you could lean over the edge, looking into the precipice of these worlds we were creating. And meanwhile, talking through how it would feel, how we could make the next step, etc., etc. Next slide, please. And then it's of course important, if you're improvising, to have basically your virtual elements ready in the moment that you need them. So we had a 3D engine, Unity, connected to some physical controls, whereby my engineer and also artist, Richard van der Lagemaat, was controlling all the virtual aspects of the experience. So he could basically puppeteer all the events within the virtual environment. And while we had a dialogue live in the space and improvising with our ideas, we basically started to design the whole experience together. I'm not saying this is the only way to go about it, but I can tell you, if you incorporate these more physical improvisation techniques and puppeteering techniques in your design process, you can actually use your own body as an experiential instrument to verify your design choices, because many things look great from the outside or on paper, but the moment you actually experience them in VR, it's a different story. Next slide, please. So this is, by the way, not only true for purely mixed reality or XR installations. I don't know if you know the wonderful VR animation movie called Wolves in the Walls by Fable Studios. It started off as an Oculus project, and later on Pete Billington sort of made it, finished it because the studios were closed. And here we have Lucy that is talking to you in her house telling you that she is convinced there are wolves in the walls of her house, and you have to help her out. And basically, you become her imaginary friend. But the way she's responding to you, it is called AI, but it's not entirely AI. It's more like a machine learning or a branching storyline kind of connection. But what I really liked is that you really feel that she is looking at you and acknowledging your presence in a way in that virtual world. While of course you know she's an animated character, however generated real time, still she follows a certain script. So I had the chance at the VR days in last years to ask the director to say, so I read a little article that you have been working with theater people. Can you explain a few things about this? And he said, yes, we have worked with theater people to improvise all the interactions between the virtual character and a possible experiencer, because there were many things that we wanted to do that feel natural. For example, at some point, she gives you a photo camera to try to capture the wolves in the walls. And if she would give the camera to you in a normal game, then you end up in this idle loop where the machine is waiting for you to take the camera, and then the story can continue. They figured out through embodied improvisations for the theater group that you could have a certain physical posture, and I cannot now do it because I have an avatar that can not do the posture, but she was basically handing the camera to you while looking away, being busy with other stuff. And your body then responds with a reflex because you're afraid she would drop it, and before you know, you have the camera already in your hand. And then she says, oh great, you got the camera, so maybe you can make some photos. Now, this sounds like a little detail, but it was actually, for an interaction design point of view, a very profound way of making sure there stayed a certain flow within this experience. And to my surprise, or actually not to my surprise, they figured this out through embodied improvisations. Next slide, please. So this is why I emphasize this so much, is because, of course, if you look at engineers and many people that are working in making all the wonderful platforms, both hardware and software, to make this happen, you end up with an interesting discussion about how to proceed and how to perceive these design processes. And I just, for the second half of this talk, and I have a few minutes left, want to emphasize a few interesting terms, because of course we're all talking about things like immersion and presence. However, when a person that is rooted in VR technology or technologies in general, they might have an idea on the notion of presence as follows. Something like presence is a shortened version of the term telepresence, and it's a psychological state of subjective perception in which all of the individual's perception fails to accurately acknowledge the role of the technology in the experience. Well, that's a lot of words, but basically what it says is, if the technology is so good that your brain doesn't recognize anymore it's there, then you will be fully immersed and feel fully present in this virtual world. And the thing is, I don't agree with that, and I'm not the only one that doesn't agree with that, because of course you feel you have a physical helmet on, even if it's lightweight, and you know you have put it on. So it's not as simple or black and white to say when the technology is so non-invasive that your brain doesn't register it anymore, then we will be fully present in this virtual world. Next slide, please. Because if you look at theater, theater is actually looking at presence in a different way. Presence can be seen in many ways, and one of them is the fictional presence, which is basically the character that you play. The other one is the presence of the other, the performer. And the third one is the presence of the physical environment. So when you're in the theater, it could be that you're role-playing if you're doing some sort of immersive theater. So you're partly present as a fictional character. There might be an actor that plays with you, which has a presence, or basically an auric presence of its performance. But you are also aware that you're just role-playing in a theater building, or you just came from outside, you took the bus, etc. So this presence of reality always remains. How well you organize your technologies and how well the performance is actually done, of course you will always know, top-down, cognitively, that what you're seeing is not real. And this is basically not really a problem. If we can go to the next slide, please. But it does become a problem when this, I would almost say, promise of presence is made. Because, for example, there's many 360 registrations of performing arts. Like, for example, the National Ballet in the Netherlands, where I'm from, was already in 2016 doing a very particular choreography that was then recorded with 360 video. And they basically said, oh, we're now having a full virtual ballet. The thing is, if you look at it in a helmet, however comfortable, you're looking at a movie. There's nothing live about it, and the presence of those ballerinas and dancers are just basically pixels that are being played on a screen. I don't feel their bodies, I don't smell their sweat, I don't hear them breathing, and I cannot, with my proprioceptive sensors, feel that they are around me. I'm looking at a screen, even if it's 360. So next slide, please. So what if then, if you would not have a video recording, but you do some sort of co-presence thing. So you have, for example, Loveseat, which was a fantastic experiment already tried at the Venice Biennale a year ago, whereby we had physical actors at a physical theater location presenting a love story, wearing VR helmets, and at the meantime being in social VR represented as avatars. So the audience here could either be at the physical location, or they could be in this case, the platform High Fidelity. And people could sort of experience it in two places at the same time. Now, that's interesting because then the question is, if you are in High Fidelity, do you actually feel the nearness of the virtual body of that avatar? I will leave it a little bit up to you to ask these questions yourself. For example, right now in the Laval virtual world, do you feel the person standing next to you is physically standing next to you or not? Next slide, please. So it can even go further. There's a game called The Under, which is absolutely fantastic because there's moments where live performers and actors basically enter this world, and as characters start talking to you, and they start to help you doing certain puzzles and trying to figure out certain aspects of this particular game. And it's very, very experientially, you can feel it when it's a live person that talks to you, or whether it's some sort of automated character. And this blending between the two is very interesting and exciting, whereby, of course, you feel it's a fully immersive experience, while there's also live actors elsewhere in the world talking to you and taking you along. Next slide, please. So, yeah, you have to press next a few times until we see the full text. One more, I guess. Okay, so I was talking about High Fidelity already. This has been a social VR platform until recently. Unfortunately, just before Corona, they decided they couldn't earn enough money. So they decided to go private again, just before the Corona crisis happened. Otherwise, we might have been all in High Fidelity right now. But anyway, what they're actually are very aware of, that social VR, like this environment, can be very real. The big difference is you're not looking at the screen. You, of course, have a VR helmet on. And I went to social gatherings of about 2,000 to 2,500 people at the same time, having events, presentations, etc. Not unlike what we're experiencing now, but again, then imagine it the full Corona crisis that we have right now. Next slide, Julian, please. Yep, there you go. I, as a teacher, of course, also have the challenge that I have to get my students to work now with virtual theaters, because basically they're not allowed to be together in a physical theater to work together. But I feel these times are actually quite exciting for this reason, because Neill's, for example, Neill's VR is very unknown to many of you, including the XR community, while I feel NEOS is definitely a very interesting platform for artistic experimentation, creative collaborations, and all sorts of educational and training purposes. It's not very user-friendly, but the interesting thing is that every aspect of that virtual world is editable, copyable, changeable, shareable. So it's really a modular, interesting world whereby you can play with basically every single aspect of what you see, what you hear, and what you can do. So I think we're now in a very pivotal time with the whole Corona crisis, whereby we're going to ask ourselves, how can I engage with other people in virtual spaces while maintaining a certain degree of embodiment and spatial collaborative options? I'm not holding the answers to this as well. This is what we're now trying to figure out all together. So next slide, please. We're almost nearing the end of my presentation. Thank God I'm still within the 30 minutes, so I'm not competing with any of the other speakers. But what I want to say here is that presence is a tricky bit here. I always am very admiring the work of Marina Abramovic, and of course you're all aware of her wonderful performance in MoMA years ago, whereby she just sat for weeks, every day, several, like 10 hours a day, just looking at people and not doing anything, not saying anything, not moving around. And people would have very profound experiences. And for a long time, I thought it had to do with her physical presence. However, after saying this for years to my students, one of the students, master student, put up her hand and said, I think actually people were so touched because not necessarily the presence of Marina Abramovic, but Marina Abramovic was really looking at you. So she was acknowledging your presence in the room. And of course, there's a large audience also then strengthening that whole perspective. And I think this is an important thing to mention, that we want to be seen, we want to be acknowledged. It now for me feels for half an hour already very strange talking to this flat screen with no feedback whatsoever. So it's important to think about what it means to be together in spaces and what it means to be present. And being present is not about you being present. Being present is probably about the other seeing you. So next slide, please. Well, I had some critical remarks on her latest work, whereby in acute art, she is, as a performing artist, doing a performance piece whereby, for some strange reason, her presence is completely lost. But we'll just skip that for now because of time reasons. So we'll move on to the final conclusion. Next slide, please. Yes. So what can we learn from theater? Well, hopefully there's some things, notions on embodiment, notions on presence that might be interesting for you to realize. And a final remark I want to make is that theater, because it is already such a grown-up art discipline, because again, they have been thinking about this for 2000 years, especially since the post-traumatic theater movement, we are perfectly comfortable with having several realities happening at the same time. And we're not trying to create a perfect illusion by having that blend into a single illusion. Actually, in many ways, artistically, it's much more interesting in having all these worlds collide and sort of not be perfectly blending together. That's where the interesting artistic questions happen. So while we need to acknowledge that we're both designing the real environment and the virtual environment, they don't necessarily always have to fit. It becomes interesting when they are actually sometimes also in juxtaposition to each other. Next slide, please. So having said that, you can find a publication that I also put in my profile where I asked 6 different theater makers to reflect on these issues from their own practice. So if you're willing to know more and read about it, then you can. Following the ITM Fresh Perspectives number 6 free publication. And next slide, that brings me to the conclusion of this introductory presentation. There's not much space for questions, but we'll have space for questions afterwards. So if Tanja, are you ready for the next presentation? Then I can also announce you already.
Yes.
The next presentation is going to be also quite an experiment because basically we will have 3 different artists, researchers presenting their very complex, interesting, and intricate work in 20 minutes. And there we'll start with the title 3 Explorers of Disembodied or Embodied XR Design. And it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Tanja, Neill, and Beth Gates. And also they will stay to the end of this session. So after the presentation of Esteban, FOURMI, and John DESNOYERS-STEWARD. So there's we have some time afterwards to also have a longer discussion together if we want. And Tanja, I'm sort of hoping that you are going to give me a heads up when you're ready.
Should be ready now.
See a lot of people move. I don't hear any voices saying yes, let's go. That looks like a good screen to me.
Yeah, so I'm presenting first.
Neill, you're kicking it off. All right, thank you so much for your attention. And please, I'll give the stage to Neill Dwyer.
Thanks, Joris. So, hello everyone. This will be quite a quick fire presentation because there's 3 of us to speak in the normal allocation of 30 minutes. So I'm going to shoot through this very quickly. So my name is Neill Dwyer. I'm a postdoc researcher at vSense, which is an XR research group based in Trinity College, Dublin. And I just must note that this research was conducted in collaboration with Gareth Young and Nicholas Johnson and under the leadership of Professor Alyosha Smolich. Next slide, please, Tanja. So, have you got the next slide there, Tanja, please? Can you hear me, Tanja?
Why don't I try to type?
Is it working, the presentation?
It doesn't seem that Tanja is responding, so maybe she is having a technical issue here.
I'll just wait for her to get up and running. I'll just send her a little text message there. Are we getting the next slide, Tanja?
Yes, I hear you. It's okay.
Yeah. Are you getting? Can we get the next slide, please?
Tanja is sort of responding, but I don't hear her voice though.
Yeah. Oh, here we go. Cool.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be presenter view. Well, yeah.
All right.
Okay, I'll just fire through it. So this is a presentation about virtual play and augmented play. And these are basically XR reimaginings of Samuel Beckett's groundbreaking drama entitled Play. Using volumetric video techniques, we interpret Beckett's text in a way that is engaging for a 21st century audience. And Play was chosen because it specifically engages questions of dialogue and interactivity. Next slide, please, Tanja. So the original mise-en-scène consists in 3 actors placed in urns, each reciting a monologue. The sequence of their articulation is determined by a moving spotlight, which Beckett calls the interrogator. They speak when the light is on them and fall silent when the light is off. So Play is a game of interaction between the light operator and the actor, mediated by light technology. In our XR versions, we acknowledge the role of the user as active. We recognize new opportunities for narrative and give the power of activation over to the end user by aligning the spotlight with their gaze. Next slide, please, Tanja. So the user thus becomes or embodies the interrogator and is empowered to provoke the character's speech or reduce them to silence. They can actively move around the virtual environment and discover the story by looking at the characters. The project investigates new opportunities for embodied storytelling in immersive XR. Next slide, please. In January 2020, January just gone, we conducted a series of subject matter expert interviews, that's SME for short, on the field of creative arts practice in XR. And the dialogues were centered around a comparative study of the two XR versions of play. Participants were allocated 5 minutes to engage each version, and then they were interviewed about their experiences and practicing within the field generally. The cohort consisted of 14 experts ranging from 25 to 70 years of age, with over 200 years of combined experience. This brief presentation consists in reporting on some of the interview fragments that are directly related to the discourse on embodiment in mixed reality. And if anybody's interested in reading this research in detail, I can tell you that the full paper will be published in the proceedings of HCI 2020, which is a conference that is due to take place in Copenhagen in July, all going well. Next slide, please, Tanja. So it was in the discussion of users and the reorganization of the audience-author relations that the body became a fulcrum of discussion. The staging of performances in the traditional proscenium format is problematic for many SMEs because the audiences are stuck in their chairs or constrained by the auditorium. They believed that by immersing audiences, MR could move them from a passive to an active position, i.e. transcending the fourth wall. Beckett experts describe his theatre as incredibly physical, and even though it can look static when you see it, in the MR versions of play, the cohort acknowledged that the overall audience experience becomes an embodied physical interaction as opposed to the passive mode of traditional performance. Therefore, MR offers the potential to engage differently with a re-empowered or emancipated audience. Next slide, please, Tanja. So a Beckett director reflected deeply on the potential of multimodal embodied audiences. She says, when the audience is sitting in a chair, all they can see is the stage in front of them. If an audience could move through a scene, engage with content, and interact with the environment, they may discover new perspectives, just as if they were reading the text. She continues, they could feel, hear, and touch the physicality of the mise en scène, and hear the spoken words of the performance. If you give freedom to the audience's body, you give meaning to the body as it moves and crouches and stands. You create a choreography of the audience. So in this context, we must ask, how can performance producers reconsider the new materials and the range of views available to the audience to curate new innovative XR experiences? Next slide, please, Tanja. So the elevation of the spectator to an embodied role in MR was also thought to add value by facilitating understanding through a co-creation of knowledge. One SME explains, this particular play puts you in the role of the interrogator of the spotlight. As a participant, you are certainly experiencing something that Beckett wanted us to think about and wanted us to understand. So when audiences watch play, they can sometimes miss Beckett's intentionality by focusing too much on the scenography or the relationship between the three actors, overlooking the role that the light embodies. In this context, MR was seen to add value to the performance because it influences the audience to think about the author's creative intentions. Next slide, please, Tanja. So, in conclusion, these MR versions of play show one way of promoting the viewer to an embodied experiencer with agency and to control the plot's unfolding. So this study shows us that this SME study shows us that SMEs are enthused by the opportunities and challenges afforded by MR, and that MR technology is disrupting traditional ways of storytelling that redefine the cultural paradigm as one of story worlding. So I conclude that the pivotal question is, how can we define and agree on a new grammar that facilitates this technologically determined redefinition of cultural practice as story worlding? And so that's it. That's my provocation. I can answer any questions that anybody has in the Q&A at the end. So thank you for listening.
Okay, can anyone hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. Thank you, Tanja.
Okay, great, because I think I dropped for a minute there. Sorry about that. Okay, if everybody can hear, then I can start. So thank you, Neill. My name is Tanja BASTAMOW. I'm a virtual scenographer, and I'm currently doing my doctoral studies at Aalto University in Finland.
Okay, Tanja, if you're ready, you're most welcome to enter the stage.
Okay, is anyone able to hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. Great. Thank
Yeah.
you. Okay, please let me know.
I can't hear Tanja. I see is people in the audience. Can you hear Tanja?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so
Thank you.
everybody can hear. Yeah, seems some people can't, but I can't really help at the moment. I'm sorry. Okay, so I'm Tanja from Finland. I'm a virtual scenographer, and I'm currently doing my doctoral studies at Aalto University in Finland. And I am an artist. I'm a teacher, company owner, and recently also artistic researcher, which for me means explorer. And I have worked on various areas of physical and virtual scenography, from performing arts, film and VFX and television, animation, experimental games, and currently, of course, with XR platforms. And I strongly feel that XR as a medium combines the artistic processes of my previous artistic work on these various fields, and of course throws in a lot of new challenges too. So about virtual scenography.
Tanja, can you hear us? I can't
Yes.
hear you.
Okay. Can anyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
We hear you well, Tanja.
Yes.
Okay, some of you seem to hear me, some of you don't. So can somebody maybe write in the public chat that most of you hear me?
Yeah, just Tanja, just a second. If you have any problem with the sound, you can just leave the room and come back directly, and it will work again. And if it continue, you can go to the campus at the reception, and they will help you to find the solution.
All right, Tanja, please continue. I just logged in and out, and indeed it worked, so I can hear you now, which is great.
Okay, I think most people hear me, so I will just continue.
Yes, please
if that's
do.
okay. Thank you.
Absolutely.
All right. So about virtual scenography, there is multitude of terms when people are speaking of creating digital environments in XR, and there is not fully established terminology yet. So I would quickly address what I mean with virtual scenography. I define it as the creation of performance spaces or narrative spaces that exist only in virtual form, but despite of their virtuality, they can and often must be in dialogue with our physical reality and our physical body. And there is like this enormous untapped potential in the transformability and input possibilities of virtual environments that we are beginning to discover. Digitally created environments follow different logic and transformations in a physical space, including spatial dimensions, material or temporal behavior. And I am just starting to discover what this means for the artistic process too. So some of those questions I will throw out there here later. And okay, here are two recent projects in which the connections and interactions between the physical body and the virtual environments are investigated. Mirage is a live performance of singer and 4 dancers, which takes place in a completely virtual set. Real-time spatial transformations occur in the virtual sets during the performance. These transformations are triggered via performer-driven motions, and the source of the transformations in the virtual set is always the performer. Thus, the interaction is one way from performer to the virtual environment. In this second project, the designed interactivity is two-way. The virtual set affects the viewer. The State of Darkness is a biosensor-driven VR art installation. It explores the co-presence of the viewer and a human-like virtual character set in a mysterious prison-like virtual space. The viewer wears a biosensor device, and the biodata from viewer affects the expressions of the virtual character and the virtual environment around them. And this creates a fluctuating loop. The changing expressions of the character and changes in the virtual environment affect the viewer, and this again affects the virtual character and the environment. And spatial design to outside agents. The virtual set responds to the reactions of the performer or the viewer, and they thus become co-creators in the process. Thus, the process of creating the virtual set continues even after the set is ready in quotation marks. What happens if this dialogue is brought in as a part of the whole design process, not just the end result? And what unexpected spatial narrative events can start unfolding if the agents affecting the virtual are disembodied rather than human body-centric, such as the behavior patterns of bees, the amount of cycle commuters on a given day, or the sound of water dropping? Could the creation of a virtual performance environment be an ever-changing process to have a life of its own, perhaps independent from the designer's intention? And lastly, I would like to address the artistic process and XR design tools. So in these two cases, the performance spaces engage the viewer's imagination rather than try to imitate photorealistic places. And traditional screen-based computer software and design methods were used during the artistic creation process of these two projects. This means there was an extra effort to create an end result that has an organic, chaotic, and expressionist quality to it. But the emerging VR sketching tools increase the embodiment of environment building processes. Also, social VR can bring in spatiality and embodiment to the collaborative design process of virtual scenography and XR experiences. And currently, I am starting to explore what happens if the whole artistic process of creating an XR experience from start to beginning takes place in the same virtual environment as the intended end result. This should be quite an interesting journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanja. People, you're allowed to clap. Thanks for both operating for everybody and doing the presentation at the same time. This is a different kind of performance skill that we need to all work on, I guess. Beth, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Tanja, we can go forward one slide.
Can you see your slide?
I can.
So
see
the
my
next
slide.
one. Great.
Yep. So, hi. My name is Beth Cates. I'm speaking to you from Calgary, Canada, in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains, and it's 7:30 in the morning, or 7:51 in the morning. I'm a longtime theater practitioner. Oh, Tanja, we can go to the next slides, and you can just advance the three of them slowly. I'm a longtime theater practitioner and an artist scholar. I design lights, sets, video, and mixed reality experiences for live performance, and have a history of working in the theater in innovative ways. I would also like to acknowledge the incredible privilege it is to interact in this way, and thanks to the technology and robust internet that most of us are hopefully experiencing. This isn't the case for everyone, and the digital divide is a very real thing. I also don't generally read off a page, and I'm trying to do several things here at once because we were told to move our avatars around to keep things interesting. So I'm trying to do that. So I have a script with stage directions. We can go to the next slide. Because you can take the theater person out of the theater, but you can't take the theater out of the theater person. And next slide, please. And there's my script. And the next slide. So in fact, controlling the avatar is embodying the action, and the different ways we're embodying action in virtual spaces is what I'm here to think about with you today. Next slide, please. I've been actively exploring the intersections of VR, AR, and theater since September 2017, creating performances with these tools. As theater makers, we speak a lot about our work as an embodied practice, meaning we need bodies to dream it, to make it, to perform it, and to experience it. In this context, I am considering both the real and the virtual bodies. These virtual spaces of collaboration, creation, and performance lead to a lot of questions, not the least of which is what are the physical and visceral qualities of a virtual experience? The next slide, please. What does it feel like in my body to present in a virtual environment? What does it feel like to a virtual audience in a virtual space while disembodied from what you are experiencing and from what I am seeing? Are there ways to bring our bodies back into the experience when the platform requires us to sit at computers? Are we feeling anything in our bodies? I'm going to guess that many of us here have some kind of embodied memory of being in other conference spaces. What we bring with us as embodied knowledge into virtual spaces is important to consider and to allow it to influence how we create the worlds that bring us together. Virtual space is haunted by embodied memory. The global crisis has isolated us from each other and forever changed how we connect. In this time of transformation, there is opportunity to build new modes of communication and performance and design. As theater artists, we create spaces for bodies to inhabit. We dream possibilities into being. We twist and modify and adopt and adapt and break whatever tools are at our disposal. We were in a different room as of this morning where we had posted stickies. Tanja, can you go to the next slide? We had posted stickies as a way of using the Verbella tool to modify the design of the space, but that's in another time and place. I'm here in Calgary, but I'm also wherever you are. Next slide, please. We sit in the most extremely mediated and telematic moment of communication the world has ever known. The worldwide performing arts community is grappling with how to respond and how to create. There's a lot of thinking and experimenting with platforms like Zoom and Skype and this one that are pushing the capabilities of those programs to make a kind of performance art happen. But VR offers something more. It offers theater makers a way to engage with bodies and three-dimensional space as we move forward into a reshaped world where gathering together is going to look very different. When the pandemic hit, questions around creating and collaborating by distance took on a significant importance for our collective of international XR practitioners, resulting in our first gathering in AltSpace VR. Next slide, please. In those extraordinary first meetings, we performed activities that explored organizing ourselves in space, interacting with objects like trying to pick up that mic there, moving to different worlds, and going for a walk together in an expressionist version of a street in Dublin. Next slide, please. Our shared experience inspired the performance experiment I'm going to be leading tomorrow evening. The ability for the avatars to be physically present, to be physically reactive to our own movements in real time provided a sense of realism to each participant, whether they were robot avatars or humanoid. Fun fact, the two women in our group chose robots. You can go to the next slide, please. The spatialized sound of AltSpace VR sonically placed each avatar correctly in 3D space, which was a key component to experiencing the world and each other in a way that felt very much embodied. That kind of realistic immersion is key. Even in our virtual immersion creates embodied memory. Each member of our group now has a memory of our journey to Dublin together, even though we were all in our living rooms or offices, trying not to step on our cats or our kids. We spent nearly 2.5 hours conversing and exploring. Our group's engagement in VR was so effective and affective that the time together has stayed with me in a profound way. It was special, and it is in my body almost as much as it would have been if we had been physically together. Next slide, please. Our interactions as a group in VR have left us with many questions and frustrated by unmalleable platforms. That's the goal now, to find or make that space where we can build and change the virtual world together. I know it's possible, and we are inspired by the potential we see to create beautiful, affective, accessible, and collaborative virtual spaces that we can inhabit together across time and thousands of miles. And that's my presentation for today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Beth.
Oh, and I am supposed to mention this experiment that we're doing tomorrow in the Rectoversal room at 6:30, which right now all the participant spots are filled, but we need observers as well. And I encourage you to come and play with us.
Yes, indeed. Tomorrow at 6 o'clock in the evening, Central European time, the Rectoversal hallway, right? It's at the ground floor. People can gather and see an experiment you're going to do, questioning all the questions you just asked.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. Well, the next speaker, Esteban FOURMI, can already try to put his slides online. I just want to also emphasize that the people you just heard talk are part of an informal research group of theater practitioners, artists, and academic researchers. And we're especially interested in the topics we just brought forward, being performativity, embodiment, presence, etc. So if any of you would be interested to join us, you're most welcome. And maybe you can talk to me and or Tanja afterwards, so you can get a feel for what we're doing and trying to research together. Esteban, are you okay? Still see the three explorers.
Hello everyone. Yeah, I'm on it. I'm trying to share the screen now.
Yeah.
And
by the way, Beth was just showing that we put these post-its on a theater space that we were offered for our lecture, but it was only suitable for 40 people. And I now see we still have 116 people here in the room. So I'm super happy that we were allowed by Laval Virtual and the great work of the team to show up here. So you also have the space to look at these wonderful presentations. You need some help, Esteban, or are you okay?
yeah, I'm trying to enter the link, but the presentation.
Oh, you have to click on those three lines and then gain control over the screen.
I need to gain control. Okay.
Yes. In the presentation tool, the three lines that you see on your screen, you have to gain control first before you can copy and paste.
Ownership. Let's try again. No, this.
Yeah, I see your slide now.
You see my slides?
Absolutely.
Great.
Can everybody see the new AOA AOR project slide? You see some thumbs up?
Yes.
All right. Ah, good. Very good. Okay, Esteban, the floor to you. And if everybody else could stay off the carpet stage a little bit, that would be really nice. There's some chairs that you can sit on. And please mute your microphone. Thank you. Esteban.
Thank you, Joris. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Laval Virtual, for inviting me here to speak to you today. To this really special presentation. So I will do my best. I was actually wanting to start to show you the trailer of my the work I'm going to talk to you about now, but it's too challenging on this platform. So I invite you to go to the Recto Verso Art Gallery, where you can find the trailer, or on my website later. So yeah, my name is Esteban, and I am the director of a company based in Ashford in the UK. And my company creates works that incorporate technology into the theater experience. Since 2016, we have developed dance production in virtual reality and augmented reality, and we tour to national and international venues. So here is a slide presenting all the chapters of what I'm going to talk to you through, which is about how we created Zero AR, our augmented reality performance. The first chapter is just a little intro about the original dance piece on which Zero AR is based on. The second chapter is going to be about creating the vision of the work, which has defined the overall experience. And the third chapter is just a basic overview of the creation process of Zero AR. Just a basic overview because it's really difficult to show you really in depth in just few slides, but I will try my best. So 0 Degree is a dance piece originally created by Akram Khan and Sidi Arabi Sherkawi in collaboration with a visual artist, Anthony Gromley, and a composer, Nitin Soni. The narrative is based on a journey Akram Khan made from Bangladesh to India to seek the reference point, the source, the zero at life core, inspired by their own dual identities. The two search for this middle point through polar opposite, becoming death, light, dark, chaos, order. Premiere in July 2005 at Sadler's Wells in London. Now about Zero AR. Zero AR, it's an augmented reality and dance performance. It's 8-minute short piece where 5 audience members at the time can interact with each other, and the 3D dance via 3D dance animation on the iPad. It premiered in 2018 at Sadler's Wells in London, and Zero AR is commissioned by Sadler's Wells, co-produced by Lyon Dance Biennale and supported by Arts Council England. So now the task is that Sadler's Wells approached us for their 20 years anniversary to create a digital work that would celebrate one of the iconic pieces that they have produced in the past. Found that the original concept of 0 degrees was giving us room to explore boundaries between the physical and the digital world, the visible and the invisible, the real and the digital body. And augmented reality technology was the most exciting tech for us at the time. So when we start to design experiences like this, we must take into account a lot of parameters, because those parameters will eventually define what you are going to create and how the audience are going to experience it. So for us, the parameters were a light technical setup, knowing that we would use augmented reality that only require a tablet or smartphone, which are really small. We wanted to keep the whole production this way. And so we didn't want to add a large set or any other tech requirement. This would also leave us more room to focus on the audience experience itself and how we can really incorporate them as part of the work to avoid any passive participation of the audience. Our challenge here was to really play with the basic of the AR. In 2018, when we did the creation, the new AR kit from Apple has just been released. And we decided to go with 5 iPads because iPads were and are still expensive. But actually today we are looking at increasing the numbers of iPads to 15 in total. Not site specific. We didn't want to be restricted to a specific location as we are a touring company. So the piece will need to adapt itself to the environment where we will present it. Zero AR can be presented indoors and even outdoors. Self-contained. All the kit needed to run the show is provided by us. The only thing we really ask is an electricity plug. And this is a big advantage when you're talking with presenters, as they don't need to worry about tech requirements or spend extra money on top of your performance fees to welcome you. Targeting all audiences and all ages. This was our chance to bring dance to a larger public. And so we wanted Zero AR to talk to anyone, even so you don't know the original work presented in 2005. If you happen to know the original work, then you will recognize the choreography, the music, and some things. If not, it's okay as well, as it's fun anyway. And speaking to all ages, especially because we would use the technology fairly unknown from the public, we really wanted to make the piece accessible. But this was also our chance to attract a new audience via the technology, which attract a large public. Content flexible, knowing we would make the tech accessible, we wanted the content to be as well. That's why we leave room for exploration and interpretation in the experience, so you can really enjoy the piece, but there are no specific rules. It's nice to see the variety of people creatively enjoying the work. And this is what we like to do in all our creations. People are free to explore and experience the work in their own ways. We don't require them to do anything specific, because how we set up the experience will naturally influence the audience in certain ways. And this is where the magic happens when you create a real interactive experience with a real input from the participants. Audience should not realize they have been manipulated and still got this feeling of freedom while experiencing the work. Another way of saying this is that we are choreographing the audience in their experience. Now the constraints. We always have to understand what are the possibilities and limitations of the tech itself first, for us to be able to imagine what could be possible to create. For example, AR technology requires real-time graphic to run on the iPad. This means the complexity of the graphic is constrained by how fast the iPad can render. In addition, AR tracking takes significant processor resources and is not perfect. It can recognize flat surfaces, flat images, but generally doesn't pick up people or smaller objects in the space. It also requires a certain level of lighting. The battery, AR will tax the processor of the iPad, which will run down the battery rapidly. So we had to test the limit of it to be able to find the number of performances and the break needed for charging in between. Then the user experience. Not many people will be familiar with using AR apps, so it should be very easy to use, as well as operating additional control on the iPad while holding it can be really awkward. Network setup. So for that, we use a router to create a Wi-Fi network where the iPads connect to and are able to create a shared experience. This was actually a premiere in AR, and we are happy to say it worked very well. And this creates the multiplayer aspect of this performance, which is a fun part. Each audience can see each other's and interact with the AR content at the same time. So to conclude this section, once we have all those restrictions in mind, we understand how each element behaves and how it will affect one another. It gives us a range of possibilities depending on the constraints, and we are ready to start the creation process. So first, it was really hard for us because we were working from a base that originally was not ours. Every idea felt empty and meaningless. And to that, the solution was 2 long discussions with Akram and CLRB, the 2 choreographers. And from that moment, everything came out naturally and made total sense. First, we followed the journey of the original dramaturgy of 0 Degrees, which was delivered through text and dance. The original work had a lot of philosophical and spiritual meanings behind, and we kept those also as an inspiration. Then we picked up the scenes with the original choreography we wanted to integrate and reimagine in a digital context. As Akram said, body tell a story, and we believe this is where the power of dance relies. For 0 AR, we had the digital bodies of our dancers, but the one most important was the body of the audience, their presence and their journey into the work. And at the same time, they had to become part of merging with the creation itself to form one. Because eventually, this is what will create the link between the 2 worlds, the digital and the real. So our task was to how to create an experience that goes beyond the tech and where audience become the piece itself and tell the story. And as a professional dancer, I use the body as a tool to express. to express, we need to go through sensations, emotions, state of mind. So it was about creating a journey that make our audience find that expressions within themselves. Then shooting, for capturing, the dancers, we use a Rococo motion capture suit. Those were affordable, comfortable to dance with, and fairly accurate. Even so, at the time, we could not capture face or hand gestures, so the capture had to be focused on the whole part of the choreography and not on the details. We also had only one suit for 2 dancers, so we had to be really organized and keep track of it. To shoot, we use a 5x5 meter square, and this square became the 5x5 meter space that we are now asking the venues to present work. Like that, the both space for the dancers and the audience are mapped onto each other's. So after that, we go into post-production, and this is where you clean up the captures, create the design, and relate to your characters and put your original ideas into practice. It's a really long process, but also maybe the most important one. And the closer you are to finalizing your project, the more details appears and needs to be polished. At the end of the post-production, our journey, our experience had 5 scenes in total of an average of 2 minutes each. We had planned much more than that, but in our case, we realized that most of our scenes, once in AR, were way too long. Felt like everything must be evolving quicker than we thought. Each of those scenes were carefully designed to make sure the audience is slowly diving into the experience, disregarding their ages or experience with the tech. And when we design those experiences, we always try to bring each element we use to the same level to complement each other. And especially for the technical one, they must disappear. Finally, our main focus while we create our creations is to leave a gap for the audience. Sometimes the audience is only 1 person. In Zero AR, there are 5. In our previous video work called Whist, there are 20. And in our upcoming production reboot, there are going to be 30 immersed audience on stage, plus the whole auditorium at the same time. So it's not just about producing content. It's about creating an experience, something that feels organic because it needs the input of the audience to become alive. It's about bringing the machine to the human level and not bringing the human to the machine level. Then testing. First, we test a lot with real audience because we think it's crucial for our creations to improve the experience. For example, finding the correct way to introduce the experience to the audience before giving the iPads. And it's not easy to find the right balance, but at the same time, it's really crucial for our experience to be good. We usually script the pitch for this part. So it doesn't matter if it's us or staff from a festival that does the introduction, it will always be the same. And I guess I personally think this is the key of all immersive experience, with or without tech. The key is to grab the audience as soon as they enter the space. Then Zero AR, it's an app, and app comes with bugs. So we had to test and challenge the app in multiple times. What if an audience decided to not follow the dancer, but instead doing something completely random? Can the app deal with that? Well, it should. Then obviously when we amend something, we must review everything, every possibilities again and again to make sure nothing is left to luck. Yeah, so this is it really. This was a quick introduction to my journey through the creation of Zero AR. And since it's premiered, we have toured to many places, enjoyed by all ages, audiences, and it will continue to tour. We are really grateful to all the artists who collaborated with us on this project and gave us a lot of effort and energy, time on this project. But now, if I were to answer like a question, how is it to design a mixed reality experience, different from making a dance performance that doesn't incorporate mixed technology? I would say that it doesn't matter to us if we use technology or not, or which tech we are using. the principal matter is always the same, which is the body. The body of the performers, the audience, the ushers. In our creation, we like to control the body or choreograph the body. For example, for the audience, it's always giving them this feeling of freedom, but the freedom you decide to give to them. But it's also about guiding them through the unknown. Most of them will feel vulnerable, not knowing what to expect or what to do. Others will feel super confident about it as they would have previous experiences. But each experience are different. So we need to think about those two different audiences coming to see the work at the same time. For one, it will be about gently building trust. And for the other one, this constructing his confidence to allow both of them to enjoy the work. The aim is to guide them both at the same speed to our world with our rules, not them imposing theirs. For the performers, is the use of the body as a tool to express, but also manipulate the audience in and around the digital space. In our next production, which is going to be a live production, performance, still using new technologies, we are looking further than that. We will also incorporate an element of unknown to our performers, which they are going to have to respond in real time. Now, if you were to ask me, how does it open new artistic possibilities and what are its constraints and challenges, I would say why we like and find interesting to incorporate these technologies in our creation is that we play with the unknown. The unknown of the tech we discover and work with, and the unknown of our future audience behaviors. So where we believe we find new artistic possibilities are when we go beyond what tech has to offer. Otherwise, it's not worth the time and pain to create those experiences. So I hope it was useful, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Esteban. Yeah, you're allowed to applause, absolutely. Actually, we have some time left, which is really nice. And I want to do a little experiment. I'm just, and Beth already did that as well. I just pasted the YouTube link in the chat. And I propose we all click on that link. And then I will count down from 3 and we watch the trailer together. So we're all watching the screen, but at least we know we're doing that with 100 people at the same time. So I suggest you try to click on the link that is in the main chat. See if you can open a browser with the AOR trailer. Because I think Esteban has given a wonderful insight in his design and making process. But for sure, it would be great to also get some idea on the aesthetics of the actual performance. So maybe you should give a thumbs up in the chat so I know that you have your YouTube film ready, and then I will start doing a countdown. There's some thumbs emerging there. Fantastic. Okay, so if we all mute our mics so we don't end up with this weird echo cacophony of the film, I'm going to count down and then we press play simultaneously so we can have this experience together one way or the other. So that's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. So I hope the timing was well, but that's absolutely beautiful, Esteban. Thank you so much for sharing your process with us. We'll do a Q&A after all the talks are done, so we also have time to have more elaborate discussion together. John, if you could please already try to get your presentation on the screen.
Right, sure thing.
It's maybe a nice moment also to mention that Esteban and John were both chosen as part of the Recto Verso art exhibition that was supposed to be showcased in a wonderful church in Laval. And Judith this morning also already presented a great, interesting experiment because she has basically rebuilt the whole exhibition also in Unity and is showcasing that work in a virtual space. And you can, and I show you the link right now. The link is in the chat. Don't start watching it while John is presenting, but afterwards you're most welcome to visit this link and have a look at the WebXR prototype of the exhibition. They're still working on it. It's going to be nicer and nicer and more interactive. But there you will also see Esteban's work and John's work as well. Next to, I think, at least 10 other wonderful XR, MR artists. So, John, are you ready?
All set.
Fantastic. The floor is yours.
All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Joris WEIJDOM, and I'm a PhD student and artist researcher at Fraser University, coming to you live from my home in Vancouver, Canada, where it's about 7:24 a.m. right now. I developed Body Remixer along with this team, myself, Katerina Stepanova, Bernard Reiki, and Patrick Pennefather. So today I'm going to be talking to you about remixing social realities in Body Remixer. Body Remixer began as a question of how can we activate the body as a site for social exchange in XR? And what I mean by this is how can we use VR to draw immersants' attention to each other and specifically to different aspects of each other than they would normally attend to? And how can we encourage them to interact in ways that they wouldn't normally? How can we amplify certain characteristics of that while subduing others? And so, give you an idea of what Body Remixer looks like. Of course, you can check out the online version. That's it's not really meant to be used online, but we've done our best to make something that represents it for the Recto Verso online exhibition. But here's an image of it. So you can see we got two projection screens, and these are essentially mirrors of the virtual space. So they're reflecting the virtual bodies that are being tracked by a Kinect. And that produces these particle systems that sort of look like auras in the virtual experience. So one person can wear the VR headset and experience it as their full reality, while the others can still interact with it through the projections. It can track up to 6 people like any Kinect experience. And others can continue to watch or interact in other ways. So it begins, of course, the moment that people notice the installation from afar, but then they can walk in and embody their aura in the mirror. This first stage gives them an opportunity to interact and explore and embody this virtual body. And then after that, if they choose, they can put on the headset. But one nice thing that came out of this is that you don't have to put on the headset, and lots of people, just simply aren't comfortable with the current VR technology. So being able to interact in a way that doesn't require a headset is important in some of these cases. And so as putting on the headset, you become more immersed in the experience. This is the view from within the experience. See the mirrors that the mirror projections you saw earlier are also featured in the virtual space. And then this is the other body as you would see it. So this is a partner that you'd be interacting with. So then the next thing that happens in Body Remixer is that you can connect through touch. So by reaching out and high-fiving and touching the other immersant's hand, you actually connect your bodies. So because we've got these very abstract ethereal particle bodies, you can then manipulate the appearance of them, and suddenly you find yourself with the particles emitting from your body and flying to your partners, and theirs emitting from their body and flying to you. So you find your body suddenly connected, and we're using this to try to draw the attention towards sorry, my mic telling me it's having some issues. Okay, it seems to be fine. Let me know if you can't hear me. All right, so yeah, so we're trying to focus you on your connection to the others. Experiences. So we end up with experiences that do not acknowledge that reality, creating conflict and splitting the body between two realities in what Maurice calls the bifurcated self, where we're partially in the virtual experience, partially still in the actual experience. Our eyes and ears are partially present, while our hands and the sensation of gravity, for example, are still present and reminding us, even when we're in an experience that suggests we're in space, we don't forget that we're standing on the ground. By aligning the actual and virtual experiences, we can create new possibilities. Because aligning the senses unifies the virtual and actual experience into one, activating and expanding upon real objects, bodies, and spaces rather than seeking to replace them. And rather than trying to escape that body's reality, this approach seeks to expand upon that reality. It takes what's already present and seeks to build upon it. So we do this to activate bodies in an effort to remix the social realities of those bodies. By expanding upon and activating the body in virtual space, we hope to alter the social norms of that space, to encourage new connections to form between strangers, and to encourage people who already know each other to see each other from a new perspective. Using this multimodal mixed reality, we mediate the perception of the immersants. We remove the superficial aspects, as I mentioned before, and we focus on movement and a very simplified version, or simplified, abstracted view of their form. This takes place in a self-reinforcing feedback loop, that by virtualizing real bodies, we make the experience feel more real, grounding the experience and allowing the immersant to become their virtual self. By making the experience feel more real, we also hope to enable the experience to be actualized, so to be taken with the immersant. As Beth had mentioned about the experience that she shared in alt space, keeping that experience with you in your memory and allowing it to impact your life, in particular with this experience where we want to create connection in a social space. And that allows those experiences to be applied to real people, because of course you're interacting with real people, even though they seem like these ethereal bodies, enabling a stronger connection between the and that virtual experience that they're having. So XR affords all kinds of new artistic possibilities, but here we really focused on the possibilities we were interested in was mediating perception and activating and expanding upon objects, bodies, and spaces in order to alter social realities. These altered social realities can create an opportunity to create new connections and alter existing ones. But in order to do so, we have to break free of some of the problematic pre-existing notions of virtual reality. First here, a major problem we faced and face in any development of a virtual reality installation is this assumption that virtual reality is a tool for reproducing reality. See this a lot in a lot of research right now. Some of the work of Mel Slater, a lot of psychology-based research tries to, use VR as a tool to reproduce reality, and a lot of the things a lot of the knowledge we base our work on is based on these studies. And so with this assumption, we end up being limited by our constraints because, of course, those constraints always get in the way of reproducing reality. And so we see the constraints as a limitation. And we produce results that are realistic but uncanny. And the closer we get to realism, the more uncanny it gets. And we produce results that are mimetic. So they just copy what we can already do in real life, but often to a lesser degree. So, for example, we can see this in the very conference setting that we're in right now. We have it's amazing that we're able to interact, from our homes and still have this conference in spite of the current pandemic. But it feels quite limiting to be still in the kind of virtual conference hall rather than something maybe more imaginative. And the fact that the previous room that we were in was limited by seating issue is telling of the problems with doing that in virtual reality. So we need to move away from this assumption and move towards a focus on acknowledging virtuality. When we acknowledge virtuality, we can see a profound change in what we can do with VR. Constraints then fuel creativity because we see them as an opportunity and we see them as guidelines and things that can inform the creative decisions that we make through our design process. Create experiences that are abstract but believable in their own reality. So because we know that they're not attempting to reproduce realistic imagery, they're attempting to form their own real experience. And we gain the ability to be generative, to create new realities that expand upon our own, because we're no longer trying to fit within the rules of this reality that we're reproducing. So we can have a conference where seating requirements aren't an issue. So the approach we used in Body Remixer, because of course this sort of seems to conflict with the idea of expanding upon or building upon the user's reality. So the approach we used to acknowledge reality and acknowledge the virtuality of the experience is an approach I call abstracting reality. And this approach enables a simultaneous acknowledgement of reality and virtuality. It overcomes the constraints by acknowledging them directly. So for example, with ours, with the Kinect, there are many limitations, of course, because this sensor wasn't originally designed for use with virtual reality, but that informed the aesthetic and the experience. And rather than trying to fight that, we played into it. And for example, the high five gesture that we used, the ability to detect that remotely. On one hand, the Kinect isn't very good at detecting anything else, but it's really good at detecting when two people high five each other. And so that informed the design and the interaction. And we integrate, we can also overcome those, by starting with real bodies, but extracting them, we are able to go beyond the ordinary limitations of that body. So by rooting the experience in reality, we can start from a place that feels sensible to the user, the immersant, and then expand beyond that and start to kind of bend that and tweak that. And finally, as mentioned previously, this allows us to connect the actual and virtual into one cohesive experience. So another common misconception that is encountered in developing XR experience is the assumption that vision is the dominant sense. And we could see this in the overwhelming focus on improving the visuality of headsets, and the fact that every VR experience requires one doesn't seem to require any of the other technologies that can mediate the embodied experience. And of course, if we think of VR in terms of one sense, we could also think of VR as in terms of an auditory VR, and we've had sonic VR, in the form of like headphones for many years now, and in many ways it's much better than the visual technology that we currently have. And if any one sense can really attribute the if any one sense can really be attributed with setting VR apart, it's proprioception, of course. And the fact that when we move around, our point of view actually changes. But more importantly, as I mentioned before, we experience this all through the body. And embodiment is multisensory. So we need to think in terms of the body's holistic experience rather than in terms of any particular sense. Focus on that combined experience between those senses and not on any one. And not putting anyone more superior to the others. So one way we did this in Body Remixer through touch. Touch enables a more complete embodied experience that aligns with the perceptions of the body. And moreover, in lines with the goals of the installation, it connects immersants. Connects them to their virtual body by when you see these particles, this ethereal body that you have in Body Remixer, it might not seem very tangible or present. But when you touch and reach out and touch another's hand, and you feel their hand and you see that touch simultaneously, it really connects you and grounds you in this body. And through that, it connects you to the experience, because of course, if you're more connected to the body that you're experiencing your virtual experience through, you're more connected to the experience. Through that, you can be more connected to others. So this connects you to the other people in the installation, both through direct touch and that sense of touch, and by connecting you to your virtual body. So Body Remixer is both a living artwork and a research space. It's not frozen in time as any kind of artifact, but instead is iterated upon every time it's displayed. So every time we've exhibited it, we've observed the interactions, we've recorded the interactions and played them back and coded things that we've seen, and we've tried to improve upon it at every iteration, so that the next time we exhibit it, it responds better to the user's interactions and responds to our previous installations. So as such, we treat the installation as an experiment, just like we need to be treating this conference we're in right now as an experiment. It's a research space where we can collect data to better enable the goals of the piece in the next installation. And I think this can be said for most XR experiences, because while there's much known or much ongoing research in VR, and much that we think we know, there's far too much unknown about VR. And I think a lot of the guidelines that we're operating by right now, are rooted in this limited knowledge that we have right now. And we need to continue to work to develop that knowledge. So we need to understand as creators that we're part of that development process, and we're involved in creating that knowledge. So not to look for any particular guidelines or heuristics, because they're not going to be able to prepare us, particularly trying to do anything that goes really beyond the ordinary. So without trying to give you any specific guidelines or heuristics, I do want to mention some essential considerations that I think we can take away from our development of Body Remixer. And in particular is to think about the experience in terms of the immersant's embodied experience. So rather than focusing on visuals or sound or anything and developing those pieces separately, thinking how does this feel to experience it as in a whole. And I think some of the previous presenters touched on this fact that you really need to develop these experiences in VR. You can't just think them up and work on them separately. It really helps to be in VR and keep on iterating and testing things yourself through your body in order to actually develop them. And importantly, we need to unite parallel realities. So rather than trying to just rip the user out of their body and throw them out into space or something like that, we need to start grounded in that real experience and then build on that, because I think we can take things a lot farther. We can push things a lot farther beyond the boundaries of reality that we currently know by starting with that reality. And finally, we really need to do a better job in a lot of cases of acknowledging the social context. Found that a lot of XR experiences aren't designed around that social context. Often they're designed, more as a one-on-one or a solo experience, and then they're plopped into a gallery, and then you end up with this unfortunate situation where you get this spectacle of the person who's meant to be sort of experiencing this on their own in a private space, but they're exposed to the world and they're put on display. And so I think it's important to really consider the social context and design the VR experience to make that comfortable and enjoyable for both the participant and the immersant and the people watching them. And as we're finding out with Body Remixer, it's also important to consider the social context in VR, because it does seem to be quite different. As we found out through our process of observing the installation, we've seen that people are much more open to reaching out and touching than they normally would be. So we need to design the experience around that to create a more balanced social reality between the two in order to make people feel comfortable with the interactions. One way that we really, one tool we found very useful for doing this in Body Remixer that the experience really centers around is the virtual mirror. And so this virtual mirror is that projection that's simultaneously present in reality as a projection and in the virtual experience as this virtual mirror. So it's in the same physical location as it is in its virtual location. And by doing this, we first off facilitate embodiment by allowing the immersant to see themselves in the mirror, because of course we never really look down very often. We kind of embody ourselves through in these virtual experiences through things like mirrors. And so without the mirror, we might not ever realize that we have a body in a virtual experience. It also unites parallel realities because it creates this bridge between the two and allows us to see into the virtual space without having to put on a headset. Sort of solidifies the virtuality of those bodies in that space. And in doing so, it also connects the outsiders, those without a headset, to the immersant, because it allows them to see what they're seeing to an extent. It allows them to interact with them and see the results of that interaction. And it also allows them to know that the immersant can see them, because of course they see their reflection, their virtual body in that mirror. And so then they kind of, they can create this understanding of what the virtual experience looks like inside the headset. That also prepares them for the experience before they put on the headset. Finally, I wanted to discuss how the current pandemic is affecting my ongoing creative work. So of course, with COVID-19, we've seen a significant shift to virtualization, as is made evident by the fact that we're all here in these avatars rather than all actually present in Laval. And I think as we've seen this shift to virtual spaces, we're very fortunate to live in an era where telepresent communication, to the extent we have, is possible. Shift has also revealed challenges and opportunities at the same time. So of course, like this telepresent conference demonstrates, there's a lot of opportunities where we can reduce our impact on the environment. And in particular, in opportunities where we can reduce the commuting by working from home, working remotely, and not driving to another location or commuting to another location that we don't really need to. But at the same time, of course, as we can notice looking around us, these platforms aren't really quite there. There's a lot of problems and limitations. Like for example, the fact that I'm gesturing right now, sitting in my office at home, and none of you can see that because I'm too busy trying to navigate my PowerPoint, and I have to click back on the screen here in order to be able to do anything. So it's a very limited experience that we're having through these virtual platforms. So I think that really helps us to understand, where we need to do the work. So originally when this crisis began and our school, I'm currently doing my PhD at Fraser University, and when it closed down the physical presence about a month ago, and we moved everything online, I started thinking, well, maybe something where something that centers around touching people and high-fiving people is not such a good idea anymore in this era. And fortunately, telepresence allows us some connection. So maybe we can develop experiences that center around this telepresent connection. But the problem is right now that we're missing far too much bandwidth. We're fortunate to be able to connect in the way that we are right now. Many of us can connect with our families through platforms such as Zoom or Skype or whatever. But these really don't do the job. We're really missing a lot. And all that we're missing is quite simply just being together. And I think that's something that we're all feeling quite strongly right now, is just this desire to leave our homes, to go out into the world and be together again. And it's not even about, interacting or connecting or any of these things. It's just being co-present. And so for me, this pandemic has really highlighted the importance of co-presence. The fact that presence remains essential, and I don't think that's going to change. And I think after, once we get through all of this, we're going to need this more now than ever before. We're really going to need to be able to get back together as a community and get over the stigma that's being created. As you treat all of your neighbors as people to be avoided, and as we try to avoid each other, we're going to need to be able to get back together, support the genuine physical connections that we all need. So I think that that's important to say that any installation or any VR experience, whether telepresent or otherwise, needs to focus on supporting genuine physical connections rather than seeking to replace them. So when this pandemic is over, I'm going to continue to create work like this. I'm going to continue to try to exhibit Body Remixer and try to bring people together through co-present experiences at a time when I feel like we'll need them more than ever. So I hope to see you there when we show Body Remixer next year at Recto Verso 2021, where we can connect in person. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Yeah, you're allowed to applaud for sure. And there you go. I noticed there's actually no hug option. You can shake hands, so that's unfortunate. Thank you so much, John, for sort of with this calm and pleasant voice making such important statements and rounding off already all the presentations with the key topics at hand. I want to propose, because thank you all for sharing this 2-hour arc already. I want to propose that if you have questions to all the people who just presented, you can ask them now. But I would also say maybe in 7 minutes or so, the presenters can sit at the different tables, and I'll put a bubble on so you can have a private conversation with the makers and get more in-depth questions, which is maybe nicer than have a talk with 100 people the way we are now. Before we start going to the general questions and also to the more private sessions, I want to announce that at 6 o'clock, so that's in a little bit more than an hour, at the Recto Verso building on the rooftop, there will be a vernissage of the virtual exhibition. Judith, you want to tell people how to get there and what it is exactly?
Yeah, thank you very much, Joris, and thank you for all. It was a very beautiful panel, virtual panel. Yes, you have at 6 p.m. a vernissage, a virtual vernissage on the rooftop of the building Recto Verso. So if you go at 6 p.m., you can click go to and to recto verso, and after you go to the rooftop. And so we do a launch. We do a virtual vernissage of our exhibition of our recto verso, of virtual recto verso. So you can see on our website, Recto Verso Laval Virtual, and you can have an interactive visit of the gallery. So we do the vernissage at this time. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I look forward to that. I will try to get myself a local beer here and then pretend I'm drinking it together with everybody. So if I can ask all the presenters to come on stage so we can sort of stand together here a little bit. And if there's any questions, please click on the button raise hand, and I'll try to sort of point out who can then ask the question for anybody of these lecturers, or maybe you have a question for everybody in a more general sense. Click on the raise hand button if you have a question. Antonio.
Hi there. Hello, everyone. Antonio here. So thank you from Porto, Portugal, tiny country, but pretty much into VR. I've got a question for everyone. First of all, thank you so much for these great insights. And it's curious that my background, I was a theater actor for many years, and I quit it. And I quit it because I wanted to become an academic.
No sé si ahora hablamos y estamos interviniendo.
Sorry, Antonio. Can everybody else mute their microphone, please? Because otherwise we cannot hear the question from Antonio.
Oh,
yes,
yeah,
please.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. So my question is, so I was saying I was a theater actor for almost 8 years, and I quit and I became an academic, and I'm now working with 360 video specifically. So it seemed like in the lowest spectrum within the immersive technologies. But my question is that there's sort of a concept that we can see throughout all the presentations, this idea of creating this conceptual parallel between stage presence and in theater and presence in XR technologies and experiments. And I wonder, how can we sort of use this idea of stage presence to help design, better design 360 video productions?
Thank you. That's a very good question. So anybody wants to respond to that? Neill, I'm not sure if I can hear you.
I didn't say anything.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I saw a text balloon. Anybody wants to respond to that question? My presenters have basically.
Yeah, Esteban here. I'm not sure if I understand correctly the questions or what the question is exactly. So,
how the notion of stage presence can also be used as a frame or a method for doing more like 360 based experiences, and 360 being 360 video, if I understood correctly.
Yes, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, our previous work is called WIST, is a 360 film experience, capturing the gaze of the audience. So what we did is like use a real environment to immerse the audience in it, and audience are navigating not through the virtual worlds. I mean, they are navigating through the virtual worlds at the same time in the real physical worlds, as we have a installation placed in the physical world for the audience to interact with the headset and the sculptures. Does it? I'm not actually. Sorry, I don't know what to say, so I'll cut my microphone.
No, that's okay.
I might have something to add to this. I'm not entirely sure how relevant it is, but I know when we were creating, I made a VR AR live performance piece that was built using devised creation methods. So we built it from zero, but what we had to do was we had to put or what we discovered as part of a really valuable learning in the process was that putting someone in the place of the immersant or the participant while having the performer with us, because the performer was live in this experience in the presentation, but having the performer with us in the room and using her presence to craft the sound of where her body was in space was really valuable, which I think speaks to some of the other presenters talked a lot about, and Joris in particular talked about the idea of improvised techniques and working with the body in space. And I think actually working with the live body as you're contemplating how to capture the 360 video is really valuable, and the actor's presence for us guided how we built the technology around it.
Yeah, if I may add maybe to the choreography, is that the choreographer of that ballet performance that I was presenting, which ended up being a 360 video, he realized that normally he would actually make choreographies for a frontal stage performance. And now suddenly they introduced a 360 camera, and he realized that actually that's the audience. So he had to sort of rethink every single thing he knew about space and bodies in terms of performance, because he suddenly had to perform in a circle with an inside and an outside, where the spectator would be the center of the stage rather than looking at it. So to have people embody this perspective is definitely helpful when you're doing these designs, because that person can also respond. So have a person presenting or representing the camera would be a good thing, because you're already can use your embodied information to say when their things are too far, too close, or how your attention is going left or right or stuff like that. So that would be a very simple and basic advice already. So are there any other questions, or do you feel you need a break, which I can imagine, but I think it was a very rich set of presentations. But are there any other questions? Raise your hand, please.
There's another hand up there.
If you see the person's name, please mention the name. I think, sure if I see. Flavio is making a jump. Well, if everybody is sort of saturated and thinking about everything we said so far, I guess if everybody's okay with that, we'll just invite you over at 6 o'clock at the rooftop. Hopefully you have a drink on your desk or wherever you are watching this, and we can have some informal conversations continuing this panel. So thank you so much for your attention, and great that we all managed to be here. I want to thank all the speakers for doing such an incredible job of many, many worlds combining at the same time, with controls and people and presence and everything, while trying to maintain a coherent story. And of course, thank you so much, Judith, for organizing this art strand within the Laval virtual world, because I think still art, and so do you, art is an essential component of the part of innovation for meaningful experiences within XR. So thank you so much for giving artists the stage to share their knowledge with everybody from the industry and the audiences. So thank you for coming here. We'll just hang around for a few more minutes. So if you want to still informally reach us or want to know more about the research group or anything else, don't be shy to approach us. And otherwise, we'll see you hopefully on the rooftop, and have a great time at Laval Virtual World. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Well, maybe we should mingle and sort of.
How do you go into private places to talk? Or, so I guess we're all just broadcasting here, are we?
Yeah. What we're saying now is probably heard by everybody. If you want, I can make private tables if you still feel you want to have a private talk with people.
You can go also on the building of Recto Verso. There is
yeah, maybe it's
lots
nicer.
of private space, so
I
you
agree.
can go there and.
That's a good idea, Judith. We
Yeah.
need a change of scenery anyway. So
Mhm.
yeah, if everybody would be interested to have a talk with us or with each other discussing these subjects, please go to the Recto Verso building. We're probably on the ground floor, so we'll see you there. Ah,
Okay,
John,
thank
you're back. Good.
Yeah.
Should we jump there right
Was it-
away?
What name of the place?
Sorry?
Name of the place you're going for the chat?
It's go to Recto Verso. It's a building that you see in the list. If you press go to, and then
Recto Verso. Okay.
yes, that's where we're going. Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody.